It was shortly before dawn when Eliana de Rossi first noticed the curling leaves and withering grapes in her family's once renowned vineyard. She stood at the edge of the long rows of vines, her eyes tracing the silhouettes of each fragile branch in the pale morning light. The cool breeze from the nearby river slid against her skin, carrying with it the memory of harvest festivals from years gone by. Nestled in the fertile hills of the region, the estate had flourished under her grandfather's stewardship, marked by lush clusters of grapes and the echo of laughter from villagers who frequented their tasting rooms. But now, times had changed. Her father's sudden illness had cut short many projects, and Eliana, desperate to restore the once great property, found herself an unexpected heir, tasked with learning the secrets of viticulture almost overnight. News of the vineyard's decline had rippled through neighboring towns, carried by merchants and whispered among visitors who'd once come to taste the estate's signature red wine. As Eliana walked between the rows of vines, she noted their pallor and droop. Her heart felt heavier than the gathering clouds overhead. The land's vitality, once the estate's lifeblood, seemed to fade with every step she took. She continued to inspect the drooping leaves, noticing spots that signaled disease. She felt powerless against nature's quiet rebellion, but refused to abandon the legacy her grandfather had so painstakingly built. Her skin prickled with anxiety, and she wondered if she could ever bring the vineyard back to its glorious past. A faint clamor from the nearby road caught her attention. It was still early, and travelers were uncommon at dawn, so she was surprised to see a dusty cart rolling in, followed by a donkey braying in mild protest. The driver was hidden under a straw hat, balancing wooden crates in the back of the cart. A few battered suitcases were strapped to the side, hinting at long journeys. Rising from where she knelt, Eliana approached cautiously, the hem of her linen skirt collecting dew from the grass. The traveler climbed down, revealing a tall, lean figure with sun-kissed skin. A broad smile nearly split the man's face as he introduced himself as Avery Grayson, a botanist and horticulturist traveling through the region to research different grape varieties and local cultivation techniques. Eliana's initial wariness softened when she saw the genuine curiosity brightening Avery's amber eyes. There was no pretense in his expression, just excitement. Despite the tension in her shoulders from the vineyard's troubles, she returned his smile, offering him a cup of fresh water. He drank gratefully, tipping his hat back as he surveyed the expanse of hills behind her. When she revealed her predicament, the vines dwindling, leaves diseased, grapes refusing to ripen, his posture grew thoughtful. He offered to take a look at the vines, mentioning that he carried with him a variety of research books, dried herbs, and specialized tools. Eliana, who had spent countless nights worrying over the fate of the estate, found a spark of hope stirring within her. They began their examination that very morning. Avery rummaged in one of his crates, producing a magnifying lens and small shears. Together, they moved down the rows of vines, cutting samples of leaves and examining their undersides. Twice, Eliana noticed him pause to scribble notes in a battered journal. He smelled the soil, sifted it through his fingers, and nodded as if discovering secrets in every handful of dirt. At midday, she suggested taking a break, offering him a modest lunch of bread, olives, and a sparse bowl of vegetable soup as they sat under an old olive tree adjacent to the vineyard. Between bites, he shared stories of his travels, how he had studied unique grape varieties in mountainous regions, or how he learned about fungal diseases from farmers along the coast. Eliana found herself enthralled by his adventurous spirit, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her carefree youth. Their conversation moved seamlessly from horticulture to personal stories. Avery spoke fondly of his father, a traveling merchant who had instilled in him a love of discovery, while Eliana shared memories of her grandfather's unwavering passion for the vineyard. She recounted how, as a child, she had run through these very rows, arms outstretched, tasting plump grapes still warm from the sun. She admitted that after her father fell ill, she felt a crushing responsibility, fearing she lacked the knowledge to steer the vineyard towards better days. In response, Avery placed a comforting hand on her arm, promising to help. In that moment, Eliana realized his confidence buoyed her own resilience. The vines weren't the only ones in dire need of care. Her heart, too, yearned for nourishment, to restore her hope. Once lunch was cleared, they continued to roam the grounds. Avery knelt in the soil again, narrowing his eyes as he looked more closely at the vine roots. He glanced up to ensure Eliana was paying attention and explained that a type of fungal disease might be spreading. He mentioned it was slow but relentless if left unchecked, and it thrived in damp conditions. When Eliana's face started to fall once more, he quickly reminded her that there were treatments, special kinds of soil amendments, careful pruning, and timely sprays of natural remedies. Her relief was palpable. A tumult of emotions welled within her, relief mixed with a peculiar warmth she felt whenever Avery spoke in his gentle yet passionate tone. Before long, Avery proposed a plan to restore the vines. His suggestion was to begin with a thorough assessment of every row, collecting data on soil conditions, microclimates, and the specific symptoms of each plant. He told her of a beneficial strain of fungus that could combat the harmful one if properly introduced. Excitement flared in Eliana as he spoke of using nature's own methods of balance rather than harsh chemicals. She had barely known him a full day, and yet something about his manner, earnest, intuitive, brimming with a sense of wonder, convinced her to trust him without reservation. Early the next morning, the two set off into the vineyard, armed with journals, small garden trowels, and glass vials for soil samples. Dawn's golden rays illuminated the rolling hills, casting elongated shadows over the vineyard as if urging the land back to life. They walked side by side, working in sync. Occasionally, they would pause at a vine that showed especially grim signs and compare it to one clinging steadfastly to health. Avery would note the differences in leaf color and texture. Eliana would record the humidity and angle of the slope. The days fell into a pattern. Mornings spent collecting data, afternoons analyzing, evenings quietly discussing the next steps over a shared meal. It felt comforting to have someone by her side who understood the land, who could read its cues like a cherished book, and make sense of the vineyard's silent pleas. Yet not all was smooth progress. A moment came when Eliana, tired from the physical labor and constant worry, felt convinced they were losing the battle. One section of vines, in a lower lying area near the creek, had become especially sickly. The leaves curled and fell off prematurely, while the stems blackened. Desperation seized her heart. During a lull in their work, while Avery was busy testing a sample, she found herself leaning against the gnarled trunk of an old olive tree, tears escaping as she stared at her beloved vineyard suffering. She feared she had waited too long, and even Avery's expertise might not be enough. He noticed her tears immediately and sprang to her side, wordlessly placing his arms around her. The quiet enveloped them both, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves. She felt the warmth of his embrace, and something within her relented. For a moment, the weight of the vineyard's decline lifted, replaced by the comforting sensation of being supported. In that quiet embrace, a nascent tenderness blossomed. One that promised this man might be more than just a savior for her fields. He could be the balm her heart craved. Renewed determination emerged from her sorrow, and they approached the diseased vines together. With a methodical approach, Avery suggested removing the most affected vines to prevent the fungus from spreading further, then introducing nutrient-rich compost and beneficial microorganisms. That night, long after the sun had disappeared behind the hills, they worked by lantern light, carefully pruning the weak clusters away. Eliana's arms ached, her fingers stained with soil and sap, but another feeling coursed through her, a deep connection to the land and to the man working by her side. As days stretched into weeks, the vineyard began showing subtle signs of recovery. Newly sprouted leaves glistened in the morning dew. The soil, replenished with compost and natural tonics, loosened around the roots. Each vine garnered special attention, as if acknowledging the care that Avery and Eliana lavished upon them. Avery introduced new irrigation ideas, small trenches filled with stones to prevent waterlogging, while Eliana organized local laborers to help with tasks that demanded many hands. Despite the vineyard's shadowed past, rays of hope glinted all around. Between the long hours of labor and planning, Eliana and Avery formed a bond that steadily deepened. They shared more than just seeds and soil samples. Over late night dinners, they spoke about their philosophies on life and love, drawing parallels between tending vines and nurturing the human heart. Eliana learned that Avery once lost a loved one during a harsh winter in the northern provinces, which kindled his mission to understand and heal the earth wherever he traveled. She confided her fears about never living up to the legacy of her grandfather and father. With every conversation, attraction wove itself through their words like a fine thread, strengthening the connection that had sparked on the day of Avery's arrival. One evening, after a triumphant day during which they discovered an entire row of vines blooming with healthy, firm grape clusters, Eliana led Avery to a hidden corner of the estate. It was a nook her grandfather had created under a large willow tree, with a small stone bench set in the center. Fireflies danced around them, and the moonlight reflected off the creek running nearby. The sweet scent of wildflowers blended with the earthy perfume of the vineyard, creating an intoxicating atmosphere. In the soft glow of the moon, their eyes met, unburdened by doubts. Avery gently brushed a stray curl from Eliana's face before leaning closer. Their first kiss tasted of hope, wine, and a promise for tomorrow. Days rolled gracefully into a new rhythm. With each sunrise, the vineyard woke a little stronger. Where leaves had once curled in wilted desperation, they now spread wide and vibrant. Avery continued to explore new corners of the domain, looking for wild herbs to plant between the vines to enhance soil health, while Eliana summoned tradespeople to construct a new irrigation network. Together, they planned the next harvest, tentatively convincing local merchants that DeRossi wines would soon regain their rightful standing. Even the oldest vines, those that had been producing for decades, began to yield sweet, robust clusters once more. With the surge of new life across the vineyard came fresh challenges. Others in the region heard stories of the vineyard's unexpected revival and sought Avery's expertise, inviting him to travel to their properties. At times, messengers arrived carrying letters of urgent appeal. The man who had once roamed so freely felt torn. Eliana sensed his conflict and never pressed him to stay, though her heart fluttered anxiously each time another invitation arrived. She recognized his gift for helping others, yet the thought of him leaving their vineyard and potentially not returning gnawed at her. She told herself she wouldn't stand in his way, just as he hadn't questioned her resolve to keep the estate afloat. One balmy afternoon, when bees hovered lazily over lavender bushes at the end of the vineyard, Avery brought forth the thick stack of letters he had received. They sat together, cross-legged in the grass. As he read the letters aloud, Eliana's face remained calm, but inside she waged a silent battle. She recalled how her father had often taught her to place the vineyard's well-being above all else. And now, ironically, the man responsible for their miracle might be pulled away, preventing them from exploring the bond growing between them. As her gaze dropped to the soil, Avery gently took her hand. He explained that while he felt obligated to help others, this vineyard too had become his home in a way. He suggested a compromise. If he traveled to consult, he would always return here. Perhaps for the first time in Eliana's life, the choice felt entirely hers to make. Tightening her grip on his hand, Eliana lifted her chin. She spoke softly of the vineyard's need for consistent guidance, of how she could not do it alone just yet. She tried to articulate her own longing for him to stay, though the words felt clumsy in her mouth. Avery pulled her close, the earnest gleam in his eyes reflecting the vow he'd formed in his heart. He murmured that he, too, was not ready to leave. This estate, its caretaker, and the new life springing from the soil meant more to him than distant promises ever could. What started as a fleeting visit to study local grape varieties had become a new purpose, possibly something akin to love. Summer ripened into a golden hue, and the grapes followed suit, plump and ready to be harvested. The uniform color of healthy leaves surrounded them, revealing a sprawling testament to Avery's and Eliana's hard work. On a sun-soaked morning, local villagers arrived in wagons, armed with baskets and pruning hooks to gather the grape clusters. Music drifted through the vineyard from a violin played by a traveling musician, and lively chatter filled the air. Eliana wore a woven hat to protect herself from the rays, her eyes shining with pride as she guided each worker to different sections of the vineyard. In the midst of the bustling crowd, she spotted Avery, wearing a light linen shirt rolled up at the sleeves, demonstrating the best way to cut a cluster without damaging the vines. The synergy of community revived memories Eliana held from her childhood, when entire families had visited to participate in the harvest, leaving at day's end tired but happy, with sweet fruit staining their hands. People laughed and conversed while the baskets filled at an impressive rate. Avery occasionally glanced in Eliana's direction, as if tracing a buoying connection that guided him no matter where he stood. Each time their eyes met, an unspoken vow passed between them, sealed by the mesmerizing presence of the vines. By late afternoon, everyone's spirits were high. Tables near the barn were laden with roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and cheeses for the workers. Eliana's eyes glittered with unshed tears of gratitude as she watched neighbors clink cups of wine still the previous year's vintage, though soon it would be replaced by this new hopeful harvest. Throughout the feast, she scanned the sea of people for Avery, feeling the tug in her chest that always accompanied his absence. She found him by the edge of the barn, sharing a toast with one of the laborers. The burgundy liquid in their cups echoed the color of the Durossi grapes, their fresh, sweet scent lingering in the air. As dusk descended, the air grew cooler, and lanterns were lit around the courtyard. Children chased each other between barrels as fiddles and flutes began to play. Under the soft glow of amber light, Avery approached Eliana, his expression tender. He extended his hand in a silent request to dance. In her younger years, Eliana had been known for her graceful steps, but she'd set aside that part of her life to focus on the vineyard. Feeling a jolt of excitement, she set down her cup and slipped her hand into his. The music's rhythm guided them into a gentle spin, and soon they were immersed in a playful waltz, an unbroken circle of harmony, acted out in the center of the courtyard. The melody swelled around them as if blessing their union, the vineyard's revival, and everything they represented. Eliana felt weightless, every concern dissolving in laughter with each twirl. Stray strands of her hair escaped her braid, and Avery brushed them away with a careful hand. In the crowd, applause sprung up, others hollering for an encore, but for Eliana and Avery, it was as though time had slowed, focusing their attention on each other's eyes, the warmth of each other's palms, and the promise that come morning they would still be standing side by side in the vineyard. In the days following the harvest festival, the bustle quieted, workers went home, and the estate settled into a peaceful hum, punctuated only by the occasional neigh of horses in the stable or the wind weaving through the vines. The grape clusters, carefully loaded into presses, began their transformation into wine. Avery spent hours in the small laboratory next to the barn, concocting experimental blends, adjusting acidity levels, and scribbling new observations in his worn journal. Eliana oversaw the pressing process, ensuring that each batch adhered to the standards her family had established long ago. Late one evening, she knocked softly on the laboratory door, stepping inside to find Avery hunched over a table dotted with flasks and measuring instruments. He swirled a beaker of fresh juice, inhaling the aroma with closed eyes, then smiled at her entrance. Wordlessly, he offered her a taste. Eliana sipped from the beaker, letting the bright sweetness of the juice flood her senses. It wasn't quite wine yet, but it held an undeniable promise. Floral notes mixed with memories of sunshine. She felt a flush color her cheeks and she set the beaker down. Their eyes locked. Without hesitation, she leaned in to kiss him, tasting the future of the vineyard on his lips. The cool autumn rains came soon after, pattering across the hills and nourishing the newly planted cover crops Avery had introduced between the vines. In the evenings, the pair huddled by the hearth in the estate's main house. reading lined up notes and finalizing methods for next season's pruning. They spoke softly about what might come in the next year and which markets they might pursue. And sometimes the conversation would drift into gentle confessions of how each day they found something new to love, about viticulture, the changing seasons, and one another. With winter's approach, the vineyard rested, its successes of the past season secure in the barrels stacked in the aging cellar. The leafless vines, though appearing dormant, now carried renewed vitality at their core. The gloom of previous years no longer hung over the land. Through relentless dedication, trial and error, and a fervent pursuit of nature's harmony, Avery and Eliana had infused the vineyard with life. Under the gray winter skies, the estate still felt warm, filled with an intangible, uplifting energy. For Eliana, it was as if the grapes themselves whispered gratitude each time the wind swept across the vines. One crisp morning, a messenger arrived bearing another stack of letters addressed to Avery. This time, he did not open them in isolation. Sitting together at the kitchen table, they perused the contents. Requests for consultations, invitations to speak at horticultural gatherings, and partnerships proposed by other vineyards longing for similar miracles. Eliana studied his expressions as the letters went on. She could see excitement flicker in his eyes, countered by a lingering hesitation. When he finally looked up, a silent question passed between them. The vineyard could flourish in his absence, but Eliana, and perhaps Avery himself, had to decide what truly anchored their hearts to this place. Reaching for his hand, Eliana gave it a gentle squeeze. She stated that any path he chose would not only shape his future, but now theirs. She expressed confidence that, no matter where his travels led him, he would find a way to return. To the vines and to her. Avery, touched by her trust, brought her hand to his lips. He explained that he had roamed for most of his life, but for the first time, he felt he had found his own piece of belonging. Love among the vines he had helped heal. They made a pact. He would answer calls for help and share his knowledge, and she would be here, stewarding their vineyard, awaiting his return. In the months that followed, Avery fulfilled a few short assignments in nearby villages, always making sure not to stray far for long. Each time he came back, Eliana greeted him with a smile as radiant as the midday sun. Their vineyard continued to thrive, shedding its former gloom like a bad memory. By the time spring arrived, new shoots sprouted rapidly across the rows. Bees flitted among wild flowers that dotted the land, while local farmhands returned to tend the flourishing vine. And at the center of it all, Eliana and Avery stood hand in hand, ununited by their devotion to one another and to the precious living tapestry they had nursed back to health. The day eventually came when Eliana decided to bottle the first vintage under her watch. Invitations were sent and neighbors gathered to witness the naming of the wine. The label paid homage to her family's illustrious history, while recognizing the transformative journey that had brought them to this moment. During the unveiling, Eliana raised her glass in a toast, tears shining in her eyes. She spoke of the hardships the vineyard had faced and the community that rallied to heal it. Then she paused, her gaze resting on Avery. With a smile, she thanked the man who had arrived one morning and discovered potential where she saw only ruin. Avery responded by lifting his own glass, returning her open, loving expression. He stood beside her, the swirl of conversation and celebration enveloping them both. Together, they drank the wine rich, supple, and brimming with the essence of rejuvenation. As the sun went down over the vineyard, painting the sky a tapestry of gold and scarlet, everyone raised a final cheer. For Eliana and Avery, it was not an ending, but a beginning, one that promised each new harvest would bring them closer. For every vine they nurtured also nurtured their own hearts, entwining them in a devotion that would only deepen with time. Together they stood beneath the twilight sky, hand in hand, certain that where grapes thrived, so too would love blossom in full bloom.